We always begin this service with Psalms, the oldest prayers that we have, the oldest liturgy that we have going back to the time of the Bible. And in that way we're going to link the life of Irv Joffe to 3,000 years of our tradition, to the people of Israel, and to the eternity of God.
Shir lamalut esaynai eleharim me'ayin yavo Ezri me'im Adonai oseh shamayim va'aretz Ayitein lamot raglecha al yanum shomerecha Hine lo yanum v'lo yishan shomer Yisrael Adonai shomerecha Adonai tzilecha al yad yeminecha Yomam hashemesh lo yakeka ve'yareach balayla Adonai yishmorcha mikora, yishmor et nafshecha. Adonai yishmor tzidcha uvoecha, me'ata ve'ad olam.
I lift my eyes to the mountains. What is the source of my help? With that question, the psalm begins, and then the answer. The source of my help is the Lord, creator of heaven and earth. He will not let you falter. Your guardian does not slumber. Surely the guardian of Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. He is at your right hand to protect you. The Lord, your keeper, gives shelter. The sun will not smite you by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord will guard you from all harm. The Lord will preserve your soul. He will guard your going and coming from this time forth and forever. Mizmor LeDavid, another of the Psalms of David. Adonai ro'i lo echsar binot desha yarbitzeni, al me menuchot yenahaleni, nafshi yeshovev. Yancheni v'maglei tzedek l'ma'an shemo, gam ki elech begetz al mavet lo irara ki ata imadi. Shiftecha mishantecha hemenachamuni, Taroch lefanai shulchan neged sorarai, dishanta v'Hashem roshi kosi devaya. Achtal v'chesed yirdefuni kol yemei chayai, v'shafti beveit Adonai le'orech yamim. Those are the Hebrew words of Psalm 23. We sometimes call it the Shepherd Psalm. Recite with me. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He guideth me in straight paths for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. We learn of many of the customs that surround moments such as this from the Bible itself. And in the biblical book of beginnings, Breshit, where we encounter not only the beginnings of life, but also the passing of the matriarchs and the patriarchs of our people, we learn that at that time, members of the family come forward to speak words of eulogy and words of memory. And so, in keeping with that tradition, we're going to hear first from the children and then from the grandchildren, and we're going to begin with Mark and Jake and Sam and Noah.
everybody. Thanks so much for coming. I've been given the honor of going through a chronology of my father's life in eulogy. Our father, Irv Joffe, lived the American dream. Born in 1925 near Kovno, Lithuania, he had the good fortune to be born to a family that emigrated to the U.S. by boat in 1928, shortly before Europe was engulfed by war and the Holocaust. Many of his extended family members were not so lucky. No doubt his early experiences made a deep impression, leading to his very practical approach to the realities of life, total dedication to his family and to the Jewish people, an adventurous spirit, and perhaps, based on his good fortune, a trusting, positive view of people and an eternal optimism. Irving, his identical twin brother Norman, and their parents Saul and Lottie lived in a tenement on Hoe Avenue in the Hunts Point section of the South Bronx, a Yiddish-speaking neighborhood at the time. Irv and Norman were cared for by Tanti Silverbush, while Lottie worked long hours as a seamstress, and Saul in the shipping department of a dress manufacturer. The boys attended PS 75, and while they were good students, they were not always perfectly behaved. Famously, when Norm was spanked in class, Irv ran to the front of the room and kicked the teacher. Scared and faced with possible disciplinary action, the family did what any poor immigrant family who does not speak English would do today. They quickly moved the boys to a new school. The boys played stickball and baseball in the street, and of course developed a lifelong devotion to the almighty New York Yankees. Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig were Yankee stars in the 1930s, and Irv and Norman followed the games on radio and had the opportunity to see them play. In 1938, the year of their bar mitzvah, the George Washington Bridge was completed, at that time the longest suspension bridge in the world. On Shabbos afternoons, the boys would walk across the bridge with the vast expanse of the Hudson River and the island of Manhattan stretching to the horizon, a thrilling excursion even today. Irv and Norman were accepted to Stuyvesant High School, then and now one of the premier public high schools in America. They excelled not only in math and science, but also in Latin and the humanities. Their minds were so similar that they often made the exact same mistakes on exams. And they completed high school with GPAs that differed by 1/100th of a point. Upon graduation in 1943, they joined the U.S. Army. They were separated briefly for the first time in their lives, but Grandpa Saul met with an officer at Fort J, convincing them to make an exception and place brothers in the same unit. They passed an exam and were sent to radio school, where they developed their technical prowess and ultimately assisted with the deployment of radio communication systems. They did basic training in Biloxi, Mississippi, and traveled by train to places like Chanute Field near Champaign, Illinois, and Truax Army Airfield in Madison, Wisconsin. In the Army, they made lifelong friends, including Arnie Daniels of Milwaukee. Following their discharge in 1946, the boys moved back to the apartment with their parents in Washington, D.C., where Grandpa Saul owned a corner store. At that time, Washington was a segregated city, and there was overt prejudice against Jews at the major universities. They enrolled at Catholic University, where Jewish students were welcomed, paid for by the GI Bill, receiving their degrees in electrical engineering in 1949. Dad took a job at the National Bureau of Standards on Connecticut Avenue. In August 1951, Grandpa Saul lent the boys his Oldsmobile for a road trip to Canada. Why Canada, you ask? Remember, Washington can be brutally hot in the summer, and there was no air conditioning at that time. On the way home, the boys stopped to spend a few days at a summer resort and singles joint in the Adirondacks called Green Mansions. Little did they know at the time that a slim, beautiful 24-year-old social worker who worked for the Red Cross in Queens, New York, had borrowed her father's black 1950 Plymouth and driven up solo to Green Mansions for vacation. Her name was Zelda Frankel. She looked smashing on the tennis court, even better poolside. Irv made the move. Zelda spent most of the next few days with Irv and Norman. While Zelda really liked him, on her drive home she lamented that unfortunately he was GU, geographically unsuitable, since he lived in D.C. and she in New York. Even at that time, Irv was not a man to let barriers stand in his way. He traveled to New York regularly and crashed with his childhood friend Sheldon Markowitz so that they could continue to date. Irv and Zelda were married on June 8, 1952 at Congregation Beth Jacob in Astoria, New York, and the rest is history. The young couple lived in Silver Spring, Maryland for a year. In August 1953, Irv interviewed for a job with the Radio Corporation of America, RCA, in Camden, New Jersey. Under the leadership of David Sarnoff, a Jewish immigrant from Belarus, RCA engineers pioneered radio broadcasting and invented television. With Einstein nearby in Princeton, Edison's Bell Labs in North Jersey, and Sarnoff's RCA in Camden and elsewhere, New Jersey was ground zero for scientific and technological innovation, basically a 1950s version of Silicon Valley. Zelda was a bit skeptical on the first visit. There was a constant stream of trucks overflowing with Jersey tomatoes making their way to the Campbell's Soup Factory in Camden. The air smelled like tomato sauce, and there were tomatoes rolling in the streets of Camden. But the job was too good to pass up, including a whopping salary of $6,000 a year. Mom and Dad lived in the Walworth Park apartments along the Cooper River, with Dad working at RCA and Mom working at Youth and Family Services in Camden. Rent was $72 a month. When Mom became pregnant with Jake in 1954, they knew they would need more space. They checked with the landlord on the cost of a larger apartment. After the meeting, Dad said to Mom, "The hell if I am going to pay $90 a month in rent. We are going to buy a house." The family moved to a small house at 314 Ivywood Avenue in Haddon Township. Mark was born in 1956 and Noah in 1960. By the time Mom was pregnant with me in 1962, the house was getting a bit tight. They moved to 1013 Robble Pass in Cherry Hill on October 27, 1962, at the height of the Cuban Missile Crisis, 2 days before I was born. The Fertells family, including my best friend Scotty Fertells, moved in across the street. The 1960s in America was a time of social change, the Cold War, economic growth, and a fundamental belief in the ability of science to conquer any problem. President Kennedy had laid down the challenge to put a man on the moon by the end of the decade, and the engineers at RCA and around the U.S. were up to the task. Work shifted into high gear. Dad worked with a team that developed the backpack radios that allowed the Apollo astronauts walking on the moon to communicate with the lunar module. He traveled by airplane, a big deal at the time, to work with engineers around the country, and he would go down to NASA Mission Control in Houston for the launches. I remember him bringing the astronauts' backpacks home for us to check out and going up to CBS Studios in New York to be interviewed as a technical expert on the evening news. Hanging in the den at home is an original picture of the Earth taken from the moon that was autographed by the astronauts and presented to Dad. A senior engineer with whom I worked had been at RCA early in his career, and he stated that RCA in the 1960s was the best engineering organization he had seen in his life. After the space program, they worked on satellites and many other aspects of telecommunications. I still remember the names of many of Dad's colleagues from the 1960s, the so-called greatest generation. Everyday American heroes who defeated Hitler, put a man on the moon, and laid the groundwork for the high quality of modern life that we all enjoy. They include Carl Solomon, Joe Howe, Fred Holler, Roger Devontier, Milt Gerber, Walt Allison, Nat Avella, Bob Trachtenberg, Will Haidt, Fred Kurz, Carl Alexoff, and many others. If you used a cell phone today or got directions using GPS, you can thank these American heroes. Dad believed in innovation and entrepreneurship. He left RCA for a period of time as a co-founder of a startup called Sonics, but ultimately rejoined RCA. He was passionate about his work and he loved it. After retirement, he continued to work part-time as a consultant into his 80s. He made numerous trips to Israel and also to China, as he had special expertise in satellite communication systems that was hard to duplicate. In China, age and wisdom are revered, so when Dad would travel there, junior engineers would insist on carrying his bags, opening doors for him, etc. His colleague from that time, Paul Sharma, is with us today. After moving to South Jersey, Mom and Dad joined Temple Beth Shalom in Haddon Heights. They have been deeply involved in the community for over 60 years, including the day in 1989 when they participated in the procession with the Torahs from Haddon Heights to the new synagogue location in Cherry Hill. A brief story. In 1967, Dad had a business trip to Hughes Aircraft in Santa Monica, California, and he planned a vacation for the whole family out west, the first time we had ever been on an airplane. On a blistering summer evening in Las Vegas, the kids wanted to go swimming, so they put on their suits and ran down to the pool at the Holiday Inn. Jake jumped in. Mark jumped in. Noah jumped in. Then I decided to jump in. The problem was that I was 5 years old and did not yet know how to swim. After a few seconds of watching me flail in the water, Dad jumped in to save me. He was fully clothed, including his shoes and wallet. Irv was a man of action, not of words, but he did have a few great sayings that crystallized his view of life. If his 4 young sons were misbehaving at the dinner table, which occurred often, the standard response was, "I want to see your mouth moving and nothing coming out." Irv's theory of money and happiness. Money cannot make you happy, but a lack of money can make you unhappy. His view of work and achievement. Only the lead dog gets a change of scenery. His advice for grandparents. Keep your mouth shut and your wallet open. His view of the future. Nothing good happens without optimism. Of course, English pales in comparison to Dad's native Yiddish in conveying emotions, wisdom, and nuances of human behavior, with phrases such as "Azoi gaitis," it is what it is, and "tuchas auf in tisch," literally ass on the table, let's get down to business. When my brother Jake was 33, having practiced medicine for only a few years, a job opportunity was posted for a new chief of anesthesiology at Newton Wellesley Hospital. Jake was clearly a long-shot candidate for this job and probably would not even have applied for it, but Irv encouraged him to go for it. Jake got the job and has had that job ever since. Similarly, when Noah was considering buying a business, Dad said go for it and helped him with financing. When I had the outlandish idea of starting medical school at age 42, Dad exclaimed, "I hear music." Mom and Dad were bold, spontaneous travelers even into their 70s and 80s. They did not require much time to plan or advance reservations. If there was a simcha or family event, you could count on them to show up, even on short notice. If you were a friend or relative, even a tuchus relative, you better watch out, because if you extended a casual invitation to stay with them, they would likely show up. Irv's passion for family, practicality, and logistics came together and found its highest expression in a science and life practice that has come to be known as Irvonomics. Irvonomics comprises complex logistical planning involving multiple family members, vehicles, modes of transport, meeting locations, sleeping arrangements, and tight time constraints with a focus on efficiency and budgetary optimization. It is frequently practiced around holidays and major family events, such as this weekend. Above all, Dad was completely devoted to his wife and family. Dad was married to Mom, the love of his life for 64 years, and enjoyed the love of 4 children and 10 grandchildren. Family was a priority above all else. The Shabbos dinners and holidays together are too numerous to count. We thank our parents for a close and exceptionally harmonious relationship among 4 brothers, our spouses, and extended family members. Were we just lucky? Yes, we were incredibly lucky. But we also credit our parents' total commitment to love and fairness, as commanded in the portion Joffe team in Deuteronomy, and perhaps the central tenet of Judaism, tzedek, tzedek, tirdof. Justice, justice you shall pursue. If Dad were here today to offer last words, he would thank everyone for coming and would probably say, have a good time, be careful, stick together, and take care of your mother. Dad had a fantastic life. He enjoyed good health for most of his 90 years, and he died peacefully in his sleep. A more blessed life he could not have imagined. And I thank all of my brothers for helping me prepare this, and thank all of you for coming.
All the years combined, they melt into a dream. In the early years, I remember spending time with Dad outside of our home in Cherry Hill. He taught me how to ride a bike, play the game of baseball, and of course, how to do yard work. It was always work before play. Inside the house, I recall helping Dad with projects that included wallpapering, painting, and fabricating cabinets for his new solid-state stereo hi-fi. Dad had 2 speeds, on and off. In addition to Dad's engineering work at RCA, he also had a laundromat business with his friend Carl Solomon. Thursday nights were repair nights. As I got older, Dad brought me with him, providing my homework was done and I would go right to bed when we got home. We worked side by side. Dad taught me about both electrical and mechanical repairs. The ride home always included conversation regarding what I learned that night and his ritual of stopping at Dunkin' Donuts. He loved chocolate frosted donuts with cold milk. When I left corporate America to work for myself in the dry cleaning business, Dad was just retiring. He was fully supportive and became my right hand, always picking up parts and managing my monthly billing. Whether on a ladder, shoulder to shoulder, or occasionally lying on the floor, Dad spent countless hours helping me the first few years. There were no shortcuts. Dad taught me there was only one way to do things, the right way. I learned a lot from Dad, but most importantly, how to work with, get along with, and treat people. Family, friends, strangers. Dad treated everyone with respect, regardless of who they were, what they did, or where they came from. Joffe was truly an Ish Sadiq, a righteous man. Dad loved life. Dad lived life. He's gone. Fare you well, fare you well. I love you more than words can tell.
The past few days and months really have been the saddest days of my life, with my father's deterioration and his death. I'm grateful that you're here supporting us and mourning the loss of my father with us. And while right now I feel the pain of an open wound, I also recognize that the 90 remarkable years of his life are cause for reverence and appreciation. And in that appreciation, I realize that for me, this dedicated, hardworking, talented, sweet, and loving man was a precious gift. So to quote the hero of his childhood in the Bronx, Lou Gehrig, today I consider myself the luckiest man on the face of the earth. My mother, the social worker who had studied psychology, says that what most attracted her to my father was that he was well-adjusted. He was comfortable in his own skin. My father was not particularly self-conscious. He was really the model of positive psychology well before the field had been conceived. He had a can-do, optimistic attitude, and also I think the engineering training taught him that every problem has a solution. All it takes is time and effort and maybe a number 2 pencil and a slide rule. I think of my dad when I hear the words V'taher Libeinu because there was something very pure about his heart and his soul. He was very straightforward and in many ways uncomplicated. He would speak up, speak his mind. I remember a couple of times when people were deceptive or dishonest with him. And his reaction was not primarily anger or outrage. It was surprise. He was not naive, but he expected people to be candid and forthright like he was. My father was a modest person. He didn't call attention to himself. Though very proud of his children and grandchildren, he didn't tout their accomplishments or brag about their successes. My father's greatness, and he was great, was his goodness. I remember walking into my father's semi-private room at Cooper Hospital 2 days after his right colon was removed. He had a large, fresh abdominal incision, and he had tubes emanating from every orifice. And my father is telling jokes and kibitzing with his roommate from Camden. And he whispers to me, he's trying to cheer him up because his poor roommate seems unhappy and never gets any visitors. For my father, kindness was a reflex. It came very naturally to him. My father was playful and fun-loving. He liked to joke around, but I can't think of anything he did purely to entertain himself. He shept nachas when his 4 sons went away together to ski each year, but he never did anything remotely like that himself. A few months ago, sitting at her kitchen table and listening to stories about my dad and their life together, my mother welled up with tears and said, "You know, Mark, your father never had a single selfish bone in his body." And his brother was the same way. Because that's the way their parents were. There really was no I in Irving. You can't possibly understand my father without considering my Uncle Norman, his identical twin brother of blessed memory. In the 1930s, parents did not deliberately foster individuality in their twins by dressing them differently, putting them in separate classes, or cultivating particular interests. They had the exact same childhood. And in the words of my brother Jake, Uncle Norman is more like Dad than Dad. When Uncle Norman died 3 years ago, half of my father died. He was never the same. In many ways, the life we are honoring today is 2 lives. That's the way my father thought of himself. I've saved the most important for last, and I don't know if I'll be able to get through it. My mother and my father were very, very tightly coupled. Their affinity for one another was off the charts. They were almost inseparable. My father's entire existence was as a twosome, first with Norman and then with Zelda. To their children, they were one parental unit. My father would do anything for my mother, and really nothing for himself. As his dementia became severe, I encouraged my mother to start doing a few things for herself, but she would not, and it was foolish for me to expect that. She would care for her partner till death do them part. I will forever be grateful for the incomparable strength of their relationship. My father was born on Hanukkah, the season of miracles, and I'll close by recalling a miracle. My father's mother, Grandma Lottie, was a small woman, maybe 4'10" at her peak. It was great to be taller than your grandmother when you're in 4th grade. My grandparents were married and lived in rural Lithuania. Like most people from that culture, having children was the most important thing in the world to them. When Lottie reached term with her first pregnancy, she went into labor, but the baby was too large for her pelvis. In rural Lithuania, there were few options. And after 2 to 3 days of labor, the baby died. During the next pregnancy, it was clear that Lottie was carrying very large. She was told she would need to deliver by cesarean section in a hospital in Kovna. In 1925, cesarean sections were risky, and after incising the uterus, future pregnancies would likely result in uterine rupture and death of the mother. This was the one baby my grandparents would have. But in the operating room, after delivering my father, the obstetrician says, "Wait a minute, here's another one." Just imagine my grandparents' surprise when they found out they had 2 beautiful and healthy boys. What an incredible blessing for them. Nes gadol hayasham. And what a blessing those 2 beautiful human beings were for me, for my entire family, and for this world. And now they are gone. They're both gone. May their memories be for a blessing.
We are actually still going in order. It's just reverse order. Irving Joffe was a wonderful man who lived a great life. I loved him. We all loved him. Nobody disliked him. My father lived his values. He would go out of his way for anyone, and he was warm without being soft. I feel best about myself when I see, or when others tell me they see, his traits in me. He was smart. As my mother, Zelda, the love of his life in a 64-year-old marriage, lived in precisely the way you would teach it, observed he had a, quote, beautiful mind. There are lots of smart guys. What distinguished Irv's beautiful mind was that it was connected to a selfless personality that was completely devoid of hubris, entitlement, or elitism. The last days were the hardest days for him. I'm doing my best, as I hope you will, to remember Irv as he was years ago and to picture him as he was then. But even as he was losing his intellect, his warmth and humanity were preserved. He was still him. As you've heard, Irv had an identical twin, Norman, who predeceased him by 3 years. Irv and Norm were totally inseparable until their Army service. One little vignette is they were together at the Polo Grounds at a football game on December 7th, 1941, when announcements were made about the Pearl Harbor attack. They were about to turn 16. As Irv would agree, he was lucky to have always had a special soulmate, to never be alone, cradle to grave. He had Norman and he had Zelda. Irv never complained. In the 61 years that we shared, I heard him complain, sort of, but once. And it was a 4-word lament in 2014 on his 89th birthday. He said, "I miss my brother." Here are a few of my favorite Irv Joffe memories. I vividly remember him emerging from the front door of our brand new home on October 29th, 1962, as Mape and I walked home from our new school for the second time, drying his hands with a kitchen towel, announcing, "It's a boy," on the day that Sam was born. I remember being proud as I watched him play baseball circa 1965, crushing a line drive single to left and making all the catches in the outfield using 2 hands with that vintage mitt. And I remember him playing baseball 30 years later, circa 1995, on a Sunday morning while visiting us in Massachusetts at age 70, badly straining a hamstring while running too hard to first base after hitting a grounder. I remember him crying on the phone when he found out his father died in April of 1969, also during Passover. I remember him elbowing me in the ribs under the chuppah at my wedding, reminding me to stay serious. I remember him putting a man on the moon. During the 1970s, we referred to Dad as the Fonz. Why? Because in the Joffe happy days of the 1970s, when Fonzie was the cultural epitome of cool, Irv was much cooler. Unlike the fictional Fonz, our Fonz wasted no cerebral bandwidth worrying about how others viewed him, if he simply just did the right thing. He was confident that he would be accepted and appreciated just for who he was, and he was frugal. He had no interest in spending money on clothing or other frivolities, and he certainly did not pimp his ride. "I like to drive a car into the ground," he would say, arriving in style in his very tired but not yet vintage 1967 Ford. Irv was passionate, focused, determined, and ultra hardworking. Ultra Clean was the laundromat business, his second job that helped to finance our education that Noah mentioned. Dad always had bags of change and $1 bills in those years. If his eyes were open, he was full throttle, mind and body. He gave all that he had, and at the end of the day, when he finally permitted himself to decelerate, he did that quickly too. When he finally sat down, he had no trouble falling asleep. He did everything, as they say in Yiddish, with kavana, as exemplified by his approach to a smoked whitefish. Presented with my insoluble homework problems in high school in math or physics, he sat beside me at the kitchen table well beyond my own attention span, tongue out, refusing to give up. As you've heard, I'm going to say it again. Irv was the master of complex logistics. That is partly what made him such a great project leader, and why he continued to play a valuable role in the Chinese satellite program at age 80. To this day, all of us, including the grandchildren, refer to the process of formulating complicated arrangements involving algorithms, travel connections, multiple participants, and real-time decisions as Irvonomics. Dad had strong opinions, and he was direct, as in his willingness to speak explicitly about death and about his own death, and to call it death, which is what it is. Euphemisms detract from the reality and the finality of the event. Irv died. I now mourn my father's death, not his passing. When I hear that, I wonder, does that refer to gas? My father did that too. Have I mentioned that Rosalind, Lucy, and Emma Rose think I take after him? And that it makes me happy when they say that. My father lived a long and fruitful life, and he therefore had the opportunity to attend many funerals, many of them here. For me, the single most poignant moment at a funeral occurs when mourners sequentially grab that shovel and one hears the chilling sound of earth hitting casket. Irv's shovel was always piled higher. He always performed more shovel reps, and he always cycled them at higher frequency than anyone else. It's easy to see from where my daughters, both more intense than me, inherited their intensity. So goodbye, Dad. The world without you is irrevocably changed. We love you. I miss you already, intensely.
Four boys, married to four women that Irv lovingly welcomed into the family, to Rosalind, Ruth, Bonnie, Mary, and a host of grandchildren, Lucy, Emma Rose, Aviva, David, Jonah, Benjamin, Lauren, Max, Julian, and Jonathan. And three are going to speak on behalf of the rest, Aviva, Julian, and Jonathan.
Many of you already know this, but I have an incredible dad. My cousins have incredible dads too. My dad, Mark, and his brothers, Jake, Noah, and Sam, are among the most loving, caring, smart, and accomplished men I know. Grammy always says they were simply good boys, but I know their upbringing had something to do with it. They were raised by two very special people, and had the ideal model for how to be a truly good man. My Grampy exemplified what it means to live as a mensch in this world. In my dad and uncles, I see Grampy's expansive heart, professional ambition, dedication to helping others, commitment to his community, practicality and level-headedness, and loving relationships. I also see the ability to fall asleep anywhere, regardless of background noise. I know my cousins and I have inherited many of these qualities, in addition to our keen sense of ergonomics and appreciation of ice cream. Grampy was so warm and full of love. Even these last few months, when I would visit, he would hold my hand and kiss it over and over and over again. His essence was simply loving and pure. I will miss his big eyes that lit up with a smile and excitement when you told him almost anything about your life, his wet kisses, his laugh, and his warm embrace. And I will honor his memory by trying to live a life of integrity, just as he did.
So we're going to share something together because I would have loved that. Grandpa, the Ganzemacher, our Ganzemacher, our big shot. He was our patriarch. There's a special connection, a connection that you can't really describe when it comes to twins. As you all know, Grandpa was an identical twin, just like us. It's a special relationship, and no one can truly understand it unless you yourself are a twin. It's a unique bond unparalleled to any other human relationship, and we didn't know Norman very well, but we saw them together a handful of times, and we were told plenty of stories of the two and their antics. We knew about their roots and where they came from. We learned about how they served our country, how they studied and worked hard, and how that special bond was really the foundation on which each of their families were built. Our relationship with Grandpa was very special, to say the least. It was clear that he had a unique connection to his identical twin grandsons, and we lived so close, and fortunately, we had the opportunity to spend plenty of time together throughout the years. He had plenty of phrases that we definitely loved. Cool it. Shh. Hold it. Hold your horses. Get the lead out of your pants. You got the spilkies? And the personal favorite, you must be a wise guy. Even during his later years, he never lost his sense of humor and was always happy to joke around about the imaginary schmutz on our shirts that we'd always fall for, of course. His strong belief that you get your haircut on your head and not at a barbershop. And even his continuous advice on not taking any wooden nickels, in which case I haven't yet. As always, we made sure to see Grandpa before heading back to school, and the one thing that he said to us and really resonated with us was, make the world a better place because you can, and our grandfather, Irving Joffe, did just that. Thank you.
We've already heard two references to the fact that Irv could fall asleep quickly and easily, and I had occasion to put him to sleep on more than one. Zelda would go like this. We come here this morning fresh from Passover and still under the influence of the Seders. And I'm not going to make this as long as some Seders have gone by adding to some extraordinary eulogies and remarks. Just enough to put it into a bit of a context. Passover is a time when we tell stories, not only that of the Exodus. The Haggadah contains stories that reflect other periods in Jewish history as well. and family stories are equally important. The Hebrew word for a story is a ma'aseh, and we know it from the Haggadah story of the gathering of the rabbis in Bnei Brak, who told about the Exodus all night long, Maaseh Rabbi Eliezer. In Yiddish, which was Irv's first language, the term for story is Maisa. A Maisa is not a fairy tale, by the way. That's a Baba Maisa. A Maisa is a story that can be completely true. And today we've heard a number of stories about Irv from children and grandchildren. Family stories are passed down generation to generation, just as the story of the Exodus in the Haggadah. Maaseh, the story of a man who was born in Europe and came to this country when he is 2.5 years old, from Lithuania to New York, to grow up in the Bronx in a Yiddish-speaking home where both parents worked, and a tanta cared for Irv and for his brother Norm. Many children had tantas. They weren't really aunts. They were people from the neighborhood who helped while a mother and a father went to work to make a living for a family. Irv and Norman didn't speak English until they began school, and we've heard how well they did at Stuyvesant High. Maaseh, the story of a boy who goes into the service of his country at a time of war. Maaseh, coming out of the service to get a college education and then a master's in engineering. Those stories may in fact be as significant as the Maaseh of the Haggadah. They provide a fascinating insight into American Jewish history, from immigrants to professionals in one generation. Irv and Norman were part of an extraordinary historical phenomenon that set the course for the next generation, and so many of us here today are the beneficiaries of that course of events. It set a pattern. It is a story worthy of telling again and again, just the way we tell the stories of the Haggadah. It also suggests something important about the term Maaseh. In Hebrew, that word comes from the Hebrew root asa, meaning to make or to do. A Maaseh is more than a story. It records something of historical importance. History does not just happen. It's ma'aseh. It is made through extraordinary effort, through immigrants braving the difficulties of going from one country to another, from one continent to another, to make a better life for children and children's children. History is made by those who are willing to put their lives on the line for their country in time of war. History is made by one generation encouraging another generation to get an education that they themselves could never have, and then supporting them while they did so. Irv's story constitutes an important part of American Jewish history. And that's not just a story. That's a fact. Ma'aseh. Another Maaseh of note, which we've heard from the family, is the story of how Irv and Zelda met, and how it happened in the early 50s at a camp in the Adirondacks called Green Mansion, which was a summer getaway for young people interested in golf and tennis. And Irv played neither. Mark says he was looking for something else. And he found it. Zelda remembers both boys, Irv and Norman, and she says she can picture them walking into the dining hall together wearing exactly the same jeans and same white t-shirt, the same carriage, their hands in their pockets in exactly the same way, and everybody thought they were seeing double. Legend has it that what attracted him was Zelda on the tennis court or at poolside. And, of course, we've heard how they were GU, geographically unsuitable. But then Zelda put it this way. She explained, Irv all of a sudden had lots of business in New York. Mahsa is being recruited by RCA and making a contribution to the technology of this country and helping to develop communications that have led to devices that we all use on a regular basis. Mahsa, working with a friend, Carl Solomon, at the laundromat, which Zelda said put 8 children through college. Mahsa, the Solomons bringing Zelda and Irv into TBS. This is the family file from TBS. It is a Haggadah all its own. It has the Hebrew school records of all of you guys. Which reads sort of like the 4 sons of the Haggadah. Actually, you all did pretty well from what I read there. Mahsa, the growth of family. Mahsa, wonderful educational vacations. Mahsa, children bringing grandchildren into the family. Mahsa, Zelda explains. Irv was a person who helped others. Friends whose children were interested in summer jobs at RCA could count on Irv. He was always willing to fix appliances for others, for neighbors. More, Irv came from a family that sent money to those still in Europe, and they brought cousins and an aunt to the United States from DP camps after the Holocaust and found apartments and jobs for them. Zelda says he came from a family who knew how to give unconditional love. And he himself knew how to give unconditional love. These are stories that convey values. Irv was a mensch. And that's probably the last lesson we need to learn about Mahsa, these stories, whether they come from the Talmud or the Haggadah, or from the life of an extraordinary man. Mahsa, these stories convey important lessons about history and about how to live life. Mahsa. Every story must come to an end. In the Haggadah, the ending is called Nirtzah, which actually means acceptable. We pray that what we have told and the way it's been told will be acceptable before God and humanity. So too, when we recall and retell the story of a life that has been well lived, Nirtzah, it is surely acceptable and more. It is exemplary. Irv's story will be a source of strength and blessing for all of you, for all of us, for all the days and the years to come. We rise for a final prayer.
שכן במרומים, המסמנו חנכונה תחת כנפי השכינה, במעלות קדושים וטהורים, כזוהר הרקיע והסירים, את נשמת יצחק בן שלום וזלתה, שלח לו לעמוד בגן עדן תהי מנוחתו. אנא בעל הרחמים, הסתירהו בסתר כנפיך לעולמים. וצרור בצרור החיים את נשמתו, אדוני הוא נחלתו. ינוח בשלום על משכבו, ונאמר אמן.
O God, exalted and full of compassion, grant perfect peace in your sheltering presence among the holy and the pure, to the soul of Irving, Joffe, who has gone to his eternal home. Master of mercy, we beseech you. Remember all the kind, caring, and loving deeds that he performed in the land of the living. May his soul be bound up in the bond of life as it is in the bond of memory. You, O Lord, are his portion. May he rest in peace. And we say, Amen. Be seated for a moment, please. Just want to note that at the conclusion of services at the cemetery, the family will be returning to Irvin Zelda's home in the cottages at Lionsgate, and there will be services there this evening and through Wednesday evening at 7:30, and after that the Shiva will move over to Philadelphia to Mark and Ruth's home.